Welcome everyone. I'm so delighted to welcome you to our next webinar. Today we'll be joined by some wonderful speakers, so I'm really excited. My name is Natalia Engebretsen-Kuchirkova. I am a co-founder and director of the International Center for EdTech Impact. And the mission of our center is really to collaborate with EdTech companies to increase their impact on learners, and also to connect academic researchers and EdTech founders. So part of that mission is to organize regular webinars where we bring the EdTech founders, innovators, and researchers who work in different domains. And today we are focusing on a topic that was actually suggested by one of the participants at our meeting, Focus on Literacy, to bring in more insights into early mathematics and what works in maths and EdTech. So I'm excited to present today's chair of the meeting, Professor Nicola Pitchford, who will guide us through the entire meeting. So Nicola, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and thank you to the Centre for organising the webinar today.
Don't speak.
Can everyone hear me?
All works good, yes.
Good. What works for maths is, Natalia, are you able to just coordinate the who's on screen? Sorry, thanks. Looking at what works in terms of maths outcomes for EdTech is a really important area to look at and to research. And I myself have been working in this area since 2013, when I had the privilege to work with a then new startup, EdTech startup, who were interested in whether or not their software had efficacy. And we've been building up an evidence base over the past decade in terms of that. And naturally it's ongoing. And it's not something that can be addressed in a simple one study. And we're joined today by a group of 4 panelists who are experts in this area, who will each bring a different perspective on this debate. One of the things that will come out of today's debate, I'm sure, is the need for further work in this area. And I'm hoping that the community that we have here online today will be instrumental in working on the issues that arise today in order to advance the field. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists today. The programme is going to follow introductions from the 4 panelists. I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then they're going to expand on that to give you all some idea of how they're working to address this issue. And then we're going to have a panel discussion, and we're going to address probably three and a half topics of interest that we hope will be of interest to you as well. And then there will be 15 minutes or so for questions and answers from the panel, by the panel from the group. So please feel free to put any questions that you have as you're going along in chat. I'm not brilliant at monitoring chat and moderating online discussion, so please bear with me. And we will hopefully be able to address some of your comments at the end. And if you find today helpful and useful in any way, we would be really grateful if you could put in chat what you found useful about it And if you would like to hear further discussion on this area, we'd be really, really interested to hear your thoughts and where you think the research should go. So on to introductions. We have 4 wonderful speakers today. We have 2 primarily researchers, which is Laura and Meetal, and then we have EdTech providers. So we have Michal and Sinclair. So I'm going to start with Laura. I've known Laura for a long time, and Laura is one of my proteges, I will say. She did her PhD with me and has gone on to do wonderful things since leaving me, and I'm a very proud academic mother. So Laura is now a principal researcher at University College London. And Laura, would you like to just explain a little bit further about your focus of work and your interest in this area?
Thanks, Nikki. So yes, hi everyone. My name's Laura and I'm currently a Principal Research Fellow at UCL. And my work in this area is very much focused around the design and evaluation of educational maths apps, particularly in the early years. So a few years ago, it was actually an idea that came to me while I was doing my PhD with Nikki. So, you know, good ideas are planted for a long time. But yeah, so I received some funding from the Nuffield Foundation to do a systematic review of the research literature around what works in educational maths apps. And so we synthesized a range of different qualitative and quantitative studies across the literature, which was published in 2022. And as part of that project, we wanted to expand the question beyond just what works, but also how or why and who for. So within that, we also did something called a qualitative comparative analysis, where we were able to look at the design features across a range of the different apps that had been evaluated to try and come up with some evidence-based guidelines of what was working to, you know, enhance children's learning. And so since that project, I've gone down the more kind of design route. So we've been co-creating something called Maths at Home with parents, which is, it's a parent-based app. So the parents themselves will use the technology and it essentially gives them ideas of how they can integrate maths into their everyday lives and sort of daily routines with their children. So we're currently in the pilot phase of this work and it's, you know, it's forever ongoing, and yeah, it's something I, you know, feel very passionate about and really enjoy, and yeah, very, very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Laura. That's a great introduction. So our next panelist is Sinclair, and Sinclair is the founder of RightOn Education, a maths edtech that's transforming the way students think and feel about maths, which I think is a really important aspect of edtech to explore. So Sinclair, would you like to give us a little bit more information about your background and the work that you're doing at RightOn Education?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nikki. First off, thank you to you for the thoughtful introduction, organizing this event, and I really appreciate your very calming voice. I feel like I'm listening and watching a BBC broadcaster and a international documentary unfold. So thank you for all of that. One of my favorite TED Talks is from a math teacher named Dan Finkel, where he shares the perspective, not knowing is not failure. It's the first step in understanding. And maybe by a show of hands, it could be your real hand, your Zoom emoji of choice, or in the chat, how many of you all have worked with or met students who will say things like, I'm not a maths person, or I just can't do maths? I'm seeing a lot of nods. There are so many interventions out there that are focused on getting right answers as quickly as possible. What's 9 times 9? What's a squared plus b squared? And what we've found is that there are so many middle and high school students, and even adults, who will say things like, I'm not a maths person. And when they are bombarded by these interventions focused on quick recall and recognition, they sometimes are not only confused, but further frustrated. Enter RightOn. We are a web-based platform that engages students in talking about and learning from mistakes and misconceptions, in turn transforming the way that students think and feel about maths, and helping them see mistakes truly as learning opportunities. We have a strong research team. We're still a very lean and mean early stage startup, but we have a strong research team that has from the get-go incorporated a lot of the research into the benefits of learning from mistakes and misconceptions. There are actually decades of research undergirding this very important body of work that translated into a real-world app that teachers and students can use in their classrooms and after-school programs. I look forward to learning more from the other panelists, as well as sharing more about RightOn. Thank you.
That's great, Sinclair. Thanks very much. And as a developmental psychologist, I cannot stress enough the importance of errors in children's behaviour, and errors which we can see as being wrong are really informative as to what children are doing, how they're processing information. And one of the concerns that I've had about particularly the kind of AI technology in education is that we assume a right answer, and there's so much we can learn from errors as to how children are tackling issues. So I really look forward to hearing more about your approach as we forward the discussion today.
Thank you.
So our next panelist is Michal from Levebee. Have I pronounced that right, Michal?
Yes,
Levebee.
yes.
I love the name. And Michal is the CEO of Levebee, a maths learning app that can be used to identify hidden gaps in math skills. So identifying what children can and what children can't do. And Michal's just been involved in a really large study that I hope he's going to tell us a little bit more about now. And Michal, maybe a little bit more about the app that you have developed.
Sure. So thank you very much for the invitation as well. It's lovely to be here. And about the app we are working on, we are trying to tackle the issue of falling student math skills, which have been again shown in the latest PISA results. And just in the Czech Republic, when I come from, now there is around 30% of children at the age of 15 who are leaving elementary schools without even the basic level of math, not being able to solve very simple problems where they know all the information. And unfortunately, the trend is downwards. It used to be 20% 20 years ago. And we believe this can be helped. And we come from a math intervention background. My co-founder, she has more than 30 years of experience with math interventions. And it turns out that the math interventionists know how to help the children and how to go back to the root cause. And so what we are doing is we have done our own research into the math dependencies and math skills, trying to split them into the smallest possible little skills, and then to try to find the connections between them. And this allowed us to create a pedagogical diagnostic assessment that is able to find out where the root cause is, why the child might be struggling, but also look forward into dependencies and maybe predict, okay, if the child is now not able to navigate series of pictures, they might have trouble with number series in the future. And when you teach them that, when you teach them number series, they may not understand it, but it's not because of the numbers, it's because of the vocabulary, because they are not able to use it even with pictures. So these are the kind of recommendations that we are able to give teachers, and we can also aggregate it for the whole class. So if you do the diagnostic assessment, you will have a report saying, okay, now these are the critical issues, these 4 kids have them, and here is recommendations on what to do. And the important part is that it's accessible to children even with special needs. This is what took us a lot of time to debug, but now even the kids with special needs can work alone in the app, which means that the teacher can do the whole diagnostic assessment in just 20 minutes with the entire class. This was very important for the adoption. And secondly, we have combine the expertise of the math interventionists with professional writers who help us to write the recommendations in a very simple language. I guess there is probably a similar shortage of teachers in other countries as in the Czech Republic, and they do not have the math pedagogy background. They do not understand the specific terminology used in math interventions. So we made sure these are understandable even to teachers without any experience. And now we had a big government project here in the Czech Republic. We were able to persuade more than 1,000 schools to run the diagnostic assessment with the whole classes of incoming first graders. So we now have the data about 25,000 students, which is 1/4 of all students in the Czech Republic coming to the first grade. So we now have quite a significant data set that we can use for studying the math skills and even the inequalities in education. And this is something that we would like to do in other countries and other regions as well.
That's fantastic, Michal, and that kind of data set that you have acquired will be so rich in terms of enhancing understanding of where to go. But what I really like about your approach is not only is the EdTech supporting children, it's also supporting teachers in being able to enhance their practice and their skill set. And, you know, to be able to build capacity, strengthen their capacity to support the children that they're hoping to serve. So that sounds really, really interesting, and looking forward to hearing more from you. So our final panelist today is Meetal, and Meetal is also a researcher. She has a PhD in maths education from North Carolina State University. And she has over 10 years experience in classroom teaching, curriculum development and technology implementation, and also evaluating EdTech products. So Michal, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the kind of studies you've been doing?
Thanks, Nikki. Firstly, thanks to you and Natalia and the ICEI group for hosting this webinar and bringing these wonderful minds together here today. I am a senior researcher here at Instructure, and the self-appointed resident math nerd or maths nerd at Instructure. So a little bit about my prior background. As Nikki mentioned, I have a undergraduate degree in mathematics. I trained to become a high school math teacher almost 20 years ago, which is crazy. And I taught high school students at a school in Sydney for almost a decade. And during this time, I became interested in EdTech, especially what some of you might know as dynamic geometry software technologies. And during my master's program, I studied teachers' perceptions of this at Macquarie University. And around the time I wrapped up my master's program, life brought me to the US, where I pursued my PhD at North Carolina State University under supervision of Dr. Jer Comfrey. And at the time I joined Jer's lab, she was working on learning maps and diagnostic assessment software. The software is called Math Mapper. And so a lot of my doctoral work, and loved hearing from both Sinclair and Levebee, because I think there's a lot of crosswalk between what you all are doing and what I had done during my doctoral studies, was focusing on the learning sciences and distilling what we know about how students come to learn and understand mathematical concepts into what the academy refers to as learning trajectories, or they're more commonly referred to as learning progressions in science education. And so my own thesis work is focused on validating assessment measures that are tied to these learning trajectories, But fast forward to now at Instructure, I'm part of the research team that came over to Instructure after the company acquired a North Carolina-based startup called Learn Platform. So we're more familiarly known as Learn Platform research team, but we're part of the Instructure family. And the research team that I work on has two key functions. One, which is our original commitment and the mainstay of our work, which has been to support public school districts in the United States to better understand and curate the educational technology that's being used in the classrooms, such that every teacher and every student has access to the technology that works best for them. And for this to happen, we help districts run their own sort of mini evaluation studies, referred to as rapid cycle evaluations. On the other side of this coin is the work that we do with companies that produce educational technologies, and that's where I primarily focus my efforts. And not all of them have in-house research teams with the capacity to run rigorous evaluations. So that part of our work, our team focuses works with these folks to evaluate their EdTech in real-world settings. And even if these companies do have their own research teams, they do value a third-party independent evaluation, which is why they also come to us to help validate the research that's already been done or the efficacy or effectiveness studies that have been completed. The framework that we use is put forward by the Department of Ed in the US, and probably many of the people are attending this webinar are familiar with, which is the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act Evidence Framework. I myself am a certified Institute of Education Sciences What Works Clearinghouse reviewer for the standards 4.1 and 5.0 standards, and I can speak to more about this when we get into the webinar. And the last thing I'll add, just because I know we have an international audience, is that I was born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya. Most of my family, my parents still live there. And so I'm always thrilled to learn about educational interventions that are being used around East Africa and the broader region as well to support math learning. So that's a little bit about me.
That's great, everyone, and thanks so much for keeping to time. We are actually ahead of time, which is great. Never heard of in these kind of things. So well done so far. So I'm going to pose our first question today to our panelists, and we're going to start off thinking about maths and thinking about what needs to be uncovered further. And then we're going to move on to sort of more generic questions about when is the right time to do research and what's the role of research in helping particularly startups get an evidence base. So first of all, we're going to consider for the next 10 minutes what research gaps exist regarding dependencies in math skills. So in particular, in relation to EdTech. And I'd like to invite Laura, then Michal, then Sinclair to address this topic in order. Meetal, feel free to add in at any point as any of the panelists. But Laura, can you kick us off, please, with your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. So like I said at the start, one of the big projects that I've done over recent years was a big systematic review of research around the efficacy of educational maths apps in the first 3 years of school. So in the UK, that would be children 4 to 7, but in other countries, it might be slightly younger or slightly older. But what we found, well, overall, we found that there was a positive effect of the technology compared to a range of different control groups. But what we also did was, like I say, this content analysis where we looked at the design, but also the content of the apps that had been evaluated across these various different studies. And what we did find was that a large majority of the educational apps that have been evaluated, as well as those that are currently available on the or were available in 2022 on the Google Play and Apple App Stores, was actually there was a very narrow focus on a specific set of number skills. rather than necessarily this kind of like broader conceptualization of mathematical development, which might include things like geometry, shape, space, measure, you know, a broad set of skills that we know that children need to do well in maths throughout their education. And, you know, like I say, while there were some that did have this kind of like broader conceptualization. So for example, the work that Nikki led with the 1 billion maths apps, like they had a very strong curriculum within their technologies. Those programs were doing particularly well, but the ones where it was, you know, there wasn't the kind of the leveling, the feedback, the sort of structured scaffolded curriculum, those apps weren't doing so well to improve children's outcomes. Now, as a researcher in this field, you know, I'm very immersed in these kinds of topics and these kinds of issues. But when we speak to teachers or when we were engaging with parents, we were finding that they weren't necessarily always aware of what some of these best practices were. And so there was a kind of almost an attitude of, well, oh, I don't want my child to use apps, or I don't want them to use technology, or sometimes they were the complete opposite. And it was almost like all apps were kind of considered as one sort of entity, shall we say, and kind of that sort of distilled down to when we did do this content analysis of the top 50 on the Apple App Store, was that we found that I think it was 7 of the top 25 didn't actually have any high quality mathematical content, which is a real challenge when we're thinking about, you know, what is it that not only what do children need, but how do we make sure that that translates into the technologies? And like I say, it's very challenging for practitioners, parents to kind of almost decide this for themselves. And so I think that's maybe where we as researchers can come in, both from the basic science side of things of, you know, it needs to be more than just number skills and what does that look like, but also then in terms of the translational research of like, well, how can we make sure that, you know, stakeholders and end users know what's good or not when they're trying to make decisions around technologies with young children.
That's great, Laura, and that leads us very nicely on to Michal and his work that he mentioned about capacity strengthening with teachers by providing detailed instructions on how to support children identified through their diagnostics. So, Michal, can you shed some thoughts on this question? What research gaps exist regarding dependencies in math skill from your perspective, please?
Sure. What we do miss is the depth of the research. Like what you can find is usually research that says something like there is a correlation between one-to-one correspondence and maybe the comparison skills, or you can find research saying that addition and subtraction is highly correlated with multiplication division skills, but that's in our experience too general, too broad to have any meaningful effect in the classroom. Like teachers wouldn't know what to do with that information. So we think there is maybe like an order of magnitude difference between what is needed and what is actually researched. What is one skill in a research paper, like the comparison, based on our experience, is actually like 10 different little skills that are leading at the end to the comparison skill, being able to say that 7 is bigger than 5. But up to that, there are skills like just distinguishing between more and less, but then more, like 2 more than and 1 more than. So it's a lot of different sub-skills that we need to recognize, and for each of them create a separate exercise in the app. And then we need to know the dependencies between them. And unfortunately, we were not able to find the research. Maybe some of you will direct me in the right way, but we were not able to find the research that would go into such detail. And everything else lies on top of it. If you have these dependencies, you can do the diagnostic assessment very adaptive and very quick, because you can calculate if the child knows this, we are pretty sure they will know all of the prerequisites before that. So this is one of the reasons why the diagnostic assessment takes only 20 minutes. And it also helps us with personalizing the app, because then, especially with the kids with special needs, if you do a really big jump, you won't be able to personalize it for them to keep them in the flow. You have to take them through all the little steps in between. And unfortunately, the only way we could test this is with actual children with cognitive disorders, because in their case, everything is made more visible. They will actually get stuck and can continue. So what we find as the most helpful is testing this in those kind of schools and seeing where the children get stuck, and maybe what weren't clear enough in the app, and maybe where we have gaps in the granularity. What we can also do is to take this map, and kind of each arrow in the map of the skills is kind of like hypothesis. So we can see in the app if someone who is doing this skill actually needs this skill or not. We could find children who are not aligned with this kind of hypothesis. So we have someone who is not supposed to know this if they didn't know this before, and we can see it in the app afterwards. But unfortunately, we couldn't base it on the research beforehand. We had to do it first, like the best guess possible, and then try to see the data in the app. And what we do also miss is more research into accessibility, usability for children with special needs. Like we had to find a hard way. Like me personally, I was seeing hundreds of kids last school year, just trying to diagnostic assessment and making notes of where they got stuck and what they did not understand when and what they were distracted by. So a lot of little details that you think are not important at all in the app actually matter to kids with autism or aphasia or any other disorders. It's quite varied. So we had to add the ability to slow down the instructions, or even just having different pictures the kids are supposed to manipulate with distracted some of them. So they were trying to create some kind of stories in them instead of just counting them. So there are little details we had to find out ourselves, and it would be very helpful, I believe, for the broad EdTech community to have some kind of research into UX for these kids.
Thanks very much, Michal. I think you've raised two very important points here. One is that the EdTech for children with SEND is near on non-existent, and it's something that I'm working on at the moment with 1 billion. And looking at what we can do to support learners with SEND, because EdTech has a lot of potential to support individualized learning. But I think the other point that you hit upon, and it's something that Laura and I grappled with your PhD, Laura, was that the understanding of maths acquisition, maths development, is so far behind literacy acquisition. You know, we've had theories of literacy acquisition for many, many years. And, you know, those dependencies are pretty well thought out within the literacy domain, but within the maths domain, there's been relatively less work. And so what you're coming across in a practical way is reflective, I think, of our theoretical understanding. And, you know, this is a way in which these two areas of research can be complementary. That brings me on really nicely to Sinclair. And Sinclair, if you can address the sub-question that we had as well. So talking about dependencies and your thoughts on that, but also the ways in which R&D teams are innovating to develop math solutions. Can you share your thoughts with us on that, please?
Absolutely. And just building off of your points, Nikki, about literacy, in 2024, seldom would we hear anyone say, oh,
I think you're okay now.
Okay. Seldom would we hear anyone say, I can't read. Right? But somehow in 2024, we still have many students who will say things like, I can't do maths. I'm not a math person. And even a lot of parents will say these things. So one thing we found, and I always like to remind my students, whether you want to build apps, go to Mars, or become the next Beyonce, maths is going to help you. Maths is in many respects a metaphor for creativity and overcoming hurdles in school and life at large. And so what we found is there's a tremendous opportunity to focus from a maths R&D perspective, not only on the cognitive side of things, but also the non-cognitive or social emotional learning aspect of things. And what do I mean by that? So much of the academic classroom world, according to our many hundreds of user interviews with teachers, is focused on grades and assessment results, right? All the while, a lot of students will go into these classes saying, I'm just not a maths person to begin with. And the thought is, the more that students believe that maths is something that they can get better at, the more they can and will. So there's been a lot of research around, again, not only the proficiency side of things, but also student self-efficacy. It's basically their belief that maths is something that they can get better at. A sense of belonging. Is this math space one that I feel welcome in? And how do we create an environment where we can boost both of these things? So at RightOn, and one of the unofficial research acronyms that some people talk about is OOI. OOI, or outputs to outcomes to impacts. So the logic model that we have been focusing on is one where, to what extent can an academic classroom environment that allows for mistakes to be embraced, that fosters what some researchers call a positive classroom culture of error? And there's work by Sonsini and Stewart that looks at what they call a positive classroom culture of error, or perceived error climate, where mistakes are not seen as a bad thing. And in fact, they're destigmatized and translated into a positive learning opportunity. Real quickly, from a RightOn perspective, we have a beta app that has a two-phase activity. In the first phase, students are presented a multiple choice question, and they work with their fellow team members to identify the correct answer. If they get it correct, great. They receive 25 points. Whether they got it correct or not, everyone gets to see the solution steps and the answer. So at the end of phase one, everyone knows what the correct answer is. Then in phase two, the same question is presented again. The only difference is the correct answer is now grayed out. And now they're challenged to identify which of the three remaining wrong answers or distractors they felt confused the most of their classmates. In other words, the most popular or most frequently chosen wrong answer. And let's say, hypothetically, red was the most popular wrong answer and 40% of the class chose it. You would actually get 40 points. And let's say green, the second most popular wrong answer, had 30% of the class vote for it. You would still get 30 points. And this simple change in dynamics, we found, can encourage students to open up positive discussions about not only why the right answers are right, but also why the wrong answers are wrong. Now, getting back to the logic model, the idea is, by creating this positive classroom culture of error, where mistakes and misconceptions are talked about and explored in a positive way, students gradually gain a greater sense of self-efficacy in maths, as well as a sense of belonging in these math spaces that longer term hopefully can achieve impacts where students are not only gaining greater understanding and deeper conceptual understanding of some of these maths concepts, but also building their self-efficacy and growth mindsets as well. So in sum, we feel that there's a lot of opportunity around meshing the great work that has already been done around proficiency and cognitive outcomes, and supplementing and complementing that with non-cognitive social-emotional learning outcomes as well.
That's great, Sinclair. Really, really interesting. And we've had a question in chat about maths anxiety, which I'll come back to in the Q&A session. So in true webinar form, we are now behind time. So we're going to move on to our next question. Which is looking more generically about the role of research in developing EdTech solutions. So, Meetal, I wondered if you could start us off with your thoughts on when is the right time for efficacy research in a continually evolving field. If you could share your ideas on that, that would be very welcomed.
Thanks, Nikki. Happy to. And I do want to come back to the maths questions later if we have time around. I have some sort of contributions to both Michal and Sinclair about, how we can think about some of the challenges and gaps in research. But to our specific question around when is the right time for efficacy research? Nikki, I'm just going to, for our audience sake, I'm going to distinguish between efficacy research and effectiveness research really quickly. And so for our audience, efficacy research, the goal is to determine whether an intervention works under ideal or controlled conditions. And effectiveness research, the goal is to assess how well an intervention works in real world. And there's merit to both of these. And additionally, in the settings that I work in with the US tiered evidence system, where we go from ESSA level 4 to ESSA level 1, there's variations of this that can happen. And so I just want to be clear up front about, I think we're using efficacy research in a general sense over here and not really focusing on just randomized control trials or just quasi-experimental studies. There's room for a bit more in there in terms of evaluating interventions. And I would say in our work across multiple EdTech companies at varying stages of development, we've found that there's never a wrong time for efficacy research. If efficacy research is done well, then in my opinion, it will always support sort of innovation and not stifle it. And so how can efficacy research support innovation? Sinclair mentioned logic models. One of the first things we work on with EdTech providers, regardless of where they're at, is co-developing a research-based logic model. And what we have often heard companies, regardless of how established they are, is that this step towards efficacy research, that is creating a logic model, not only supports actual study design and execution down the line, but it also helps align all the internal teams on key aspects, such as who is the product designed for? How is it supposed to be used under, what does fidelity of use look like? What are the key outcomes that tool will help students and teachers attain? And product, dev, customer-facing teams all benefit from reviewing their logic model and really scrutinizing assumptions that each of them hold about what their EdTech can actually do. So my short answer is there's never a bad time for conducting efficacy research, and there's a tiered approach that we can always take.
Thank you, Meetal. That's really, really interesting. And I'd like to hear from Sinclair and Michal next on your experience as EdTech developers as to when you have felt the need to bring in research, and so to avoid sort of invalidating any previous research that's been taken place. What's your approach there? Perhaps Sinclair could take us first.
Sure, I'll answer real quickly. I think Michal probably has a lot of great perspective on this as well. My perspective is the sooner, the better. It's so imperative to build that mindset into your work as early as possible. And I'll just leave it at that.
Brilliant, that's great. Michal, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I agree that I think it's important to have the mindset from the beginning. Then the question is about the specific type of research at a specific stage. Like for us, it's always been driven by the questions that we wanted to answer. I think this works the best for the EdTech companies. Like we wanted to know, are the kids able to do this in without any assistance from teachers, and how much? Like how much assistance do they need, and what can we do to improve it in the future? So that's why we tested it with hundreds of children and basically observed them, write down what caused them to ask questions or get stuck somewhere. So I think it's driven by the initial questions. Some of them might be answered even by external research. And I think it's important to mention too that there has been other studies done. I really like the work of Martin Talvit from Sweden about the intelligence tutoring system. That was very helpful for us right at the beginning, where they studied how teachers use it or why they actually don't use it. That's what the finding was. And one of the issues they identified is the explainability and the responsibility. Like if you have an intelligent tutor and you put a child in front of it, then what is your responsibility as a teacher? If a parent comes and asks why my child is struggling with math, and your answer is what, like, I don't know, because I put the child in front of the computer. So that actually led us to the understanding that we should make sure it's explainable. That's why we emphasize the math dependency so much, because we have a diagram of them. We give it to the teachers. We try to make sure that the teacher knows at each moment what the app is trying to teach. So in case the app fails for any reason, could be because we have not made it good enough for certain special education needs, then they can take over because they know what the current goal at each moment is. So definitely external research could answer some of your questions. So from the economic point of view, it always makes sense to first try to find someone else who maybe did similar research as you. But when it comes to the controlled efficacy studies, we haven't done them, and the reason is just financial. And I agree with the question that it's very hard to find out what is the right time for us financially. That's the reason why it's difficult to time, because I've seen how much the app changed in the last year and how little details could completely throw off the children, especially the ones with the special education needs. So it's not a given that all the improvements you make are always just making it better. You have to test them as well. So if we did the controlled trial study now, it may take maybe a year or something, but the app has changed in the meantime. The research might be kind of invalid in the meantime. So that's still something we haven't figured out when to do, and so far we are testing whether the app is used according to the logic model, whether teachers are learning something from the app. These are all things that we can measure ourselves, but controlled group study is something we haven't invested into yet, because we see that the app is changing so fast that probably it may not be valid in 1 or 2 years.
That's great, Sinclair, and I think we'll perhaps pick up on some of those points in the Q&A. I think you've introduced us to the next topic, so I'm just going to go on, and just mindful that we're in Q&A time. So Laura, I'm going to ask you to identify, and Michal's already talked about finance, which I think is going to be the biggest one, what barriers there are to efficacy research, and maybe some of the solutions as well that you've come across. So maybe Laura and then Meetal, could we have your thoughts on that, and then we'll go to Q&A if that's okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so the first sort of thoughts that were coming to mind as Michal was talking was that indeed that, you know, there are the financial barriers, but also I think there's a need to collaborate with researchers, because I think within efficacy studies, there's a real need to rely on mixed methods. So rather that, you know, understandably, there is a kind of preference for, randomized control trials, which are great, but trials like those will only often give you the kind of overall group mean of whether Levebee or RightOn education works in comparison to one form of a control group. Whereas actually, and as we've seen in some of the qualitative work that we did, Nikki, is that, there were some children that responded really well to the intervention, and there were some that didn't respond so well. And often that's lost if you were to just rely on the quantitative work. I also think within the maths field more specifically, some of the barriers are from a researcher perspective as well, in terms of the availability of measures that we have. So again, there's quite often a preference for standardized measures. So whether that's a diagnostic test or like a kind of a gold standard measure that is used in research, in the research literature. But quite often those tests, one, they're expensive, they require one-to-one administration, but also they're not designed for the purpose of capturing change over the course of an intervention. And so in some of my kind of other work, but it all sort of feeds into this sort of like larger umbrella, is like trying to identify measures that are potentially helpful in that way. So for example, are they is there an alignment between the standardized measures and the intervention under question? Because if you were to just choose a measure off the shelf because somebody else in a previous study used it, it might not necessarily be suitable to your context. And so you might have a really good intervention, but if your methodology isn't strong enough or there's issues with measurement, you potentially might find a null effect. And it's not because your intervention isn't good, it's that there are issues within the methodology. And so again, kind of thinking about that sort of pipeline of research that Meetal was talking about, I think there's a real value in, not just establishing theory of change in your logic models, but it's also running these smaller scale pilot studies so that you can really refine your methodological approach to the research that you're doing.
Yeah, good answer, Laura, and really a call for researchers to open their eyes a little bit more to more innovative ways of evaluating EdTech, education programs in general. Meetal, any further thoughts on that you can add?
Yeah, sure. A few disparate thoughts. I'll try and weave them together. So in terms of barriers of entry to efficacy research, I know the large incumbent companies are more likely to generate efficacy research because of funding than emerging startups. But as it stands, I think in the US, there's nothing stopping emerging startups from actually entering the market. And the only way, the blocker is if you want federal dollars to be spent on your product, then you're gonna need to be able to demonstrate certain levels of evidence. And this could be anywhere from a logic model up to an RCT. It doesn't have to be a randomized control trial. So for those interested, I can link this later. My colleagues, Alexandra Lee and her team, they've worked on a policy atlas that documents what the various states in the United States require from product providers in order to demonstrate effectiveness evidence. It doesn't always have to be a randomized control trial. And I would just like to reiterate the point that I hope those that are listening, that they're able to set aside funds to support internal or independent research in a way that's baked into the product development process, because I think ultimately, as Sinclair mentioned, it is if you have this iterative model of improving your product using research, and it doesn't have to be efficacy research like randomized control trial. It could be design-based implementation research, as Laura mentioned, or pilot studies or any of that. If that's baked in, it's really sort of a fantastic way of having research inform product development. And that's where I think the tiered S evidence is fantastic for emerging startups. There's a very clear ramp up to the holy grail, the randomized control trial. And so everyone can work on a logic model. And yes, it doesn't get you the most desirable as a badge for your product, it does pave the way for conducting well thought out, well-designed evaluations for your product. This provides opportunities to run implementation studies or even simple correlative studies that focus on uncovering implementation issues, and they also may allow us to repeat these in multiple different contexts to see how how we can support teachers and students in different settings. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, if you're an emerging startup, you should not be aiming for a quasi-experimental or an RCT. There is so much that can be done before you so that you're setting yourself up for success with a QED or RCT in the future. Because the last thing you want to hear if you do aim for that RCT is, we didn't get statistically significant results because not enough kids use the product because of X, Y, and Z implementation issues. And so there's a ramp up to RCTs and QEDs, and I want to heavily emphasize that correlative study designs and design-based implementation research can actually support and pave the way for well-designed RCTs in the future, and just setting yourself up for success.
That's brilliant, Meetal. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists today for what I hope has been a really interesting and informative discussion. We've got some questions in chat that I know the panelists have been answering as we've been going along, or addressing as we've been going along. I just want to spend the last 4 minutes by opening it up to the floor. If anybody has a question they would like to ask, please come online and ask it. Otherwise, I will field a couple of questions from the chat.
Sorry, Nikki, if no one would like to have a question, I just would like to have like our great panelists' comments on the, I have a question on the chat actually about the new search, new appearance of Gen AI, and then the question related to why learning math and what should be covered as a math literacy, like for public school or K-12 level, where like in the future maybe a lot of the like contents and the problems are actually not really used in daily life, and what methods should do to motivate students. I know that Sinclair just shared a lot on this, but I also would love to hear more from other panelists also.
That's great, Tam. And I was actually going to pick up your question because I think it's quite a philosophical one. So, if generative AI can do this, then why should we learn it? If that's not simplifying it too much. When I was a child, calculators were being brought into classrooms, and I think the similar thing was being addressed then. If you could do it on a calculator, why should you learn maths? I think there's a huge amount of evidence linking maths to general health outcomes and success in life. And I think in terms of the developing cognitive system and how that supports other brain systems, a mathematical understanding is critical. It's a foundation for a lot of other learning and success in life. So I would like to think that maths stays prominent in our education curriculum. But maybe our panelists could shed some light on that. Meetal, you've got the maths background. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it sort of harks back to, Nikki, I think you said this, like when we had the calculators come in, everyone was like, gosh, there was some hysteria around that. And to me, I think the beauty of being able to do mathematics is being able to look at the world around you, ask the right questions, and then recognize that there is a model out there that can help you answer the questions. And as far as I can tell, there's no generative AI that actually does that yet. And so true conceptual understanding in mathematics is not being able to throw a question into generative AI and get an answer, because, I mean, we've had Wolfram Alpha that can integrate and differentiate pretty complex functions, and that's been around for a while now, you know? And so, but that doesn't mean that you're actually doing calculus by throwing a function into Wolfram Alpha and having it differentiate it for you or integrate it for you. I think the point is, what does that function represent? And how are you going to then manipulate that function to answer questions about the world around you? And that's, to me, the idea of doing mathematics and understanding the real beauty of mathematics and problem solving with it. So not really worried about generative AI kind of taking over just as yet. Maybe I'll be wrong. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Yeah, I still think doing mathematics is more than just throwing something into a chatbot and having it solve it.
Well, I think the idea of the beauty of mathematics, Meetal, is a perfect end to this webinar. So I would like to thank everyone today for your contribution. I'd like to thank the people online who have listened and who have added to the discussion through chat. And if you've got any feedback for us, then please add it in the chat. We always like to learn from our participants as well. And final wrap up over to Natalia.
Oh, just to say a huge thank you. It was a real pleasure to be part of this, and I look forward to seeing everyone at our next webinar. Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Bye-bye.